Okay, trial number 2. Let me get you back here for just a second, then we'll go through that disclaimer. So you guys voted, and this is what we got. So we're going to be talking about how to reduce debts in order to, pay them off more quickly on the current income you have. Or in other words, how can I get your dollar to have more power than it currently has when you don't understand some of these strategies? What's cool is everything that we're talking about tonight is not magic, it's just math. And so I wanted to share that with you. So we're going to be talking about some banking tips. So I got to put this disclaimer out there because I am not a financial planner. I do not work at the bank. I am not an educator in that standpoint. These are just tools that I've learned to use in my life as a real estate investor that I think would share with you guys and find a great benefit. So I've got a PowerPoint to walk you through, but I just wanted to put on here. So what we're going to be talking about is a hypothetical example to show you how some of these principles work. This hypothetical example is intended to be for general information. Results depend upon a variety of factors unique to each person's individual circumstance. This hypothetical example does not guarantee or predict a similar result in any past, present, or future situation. Everyone's results will be as unique as the individual themselves. We all have different lives. We all do different things. But if we can put some of these principles into practice, then I think you'll be able to find some great benefit. Okay, so there's that. Now let's actually get into the meat of this. So in order to have a debt to be reduced, we had to have an example of somebody's life and how they're spending their money. So I want you to just kind of follow along. This is an imaginary made-up circumstance based on just kind of some averages that we felt would be seen out there. Okay, so whether you are an individual making $5,000 in income a month, or whether you are, a married couple or whatever your circumstances are, we find that kind of an average household income in a month is about $5,000. So we use that. Most of the time when we receive our paycheck, we bring that in and we put it in either our checking or our savings account. And so we use that money, right? We have debts out there. So let's look at some of these debts. These numbers that I'm showing you are real numbers for this circumstance. Some of the numbers have been rounded off. So in this case, we've got a mortgage of $1,200 on a home that was purchased for $200,000 with a 30-year mortgage at 6% interest. If you actually run those numbers through an amortization calculator, you will find that they're very accurate and close if you just round them off. So with that, let's say that we've got $12,000 owed on a car, and that car payment's about $600 a month. And then we've got credit cards, right? A lot of us have credit cards these days. So if we've got lines of credit out there, in this particular example, we've got $15,000 limit on that line of credit, but we have a $12,000 balance currently being utilized, right? We've charged it up that much. And then we've got a $600 a month payment for that at 21% interest. And then we have what I call lifestyle money. That's really just all the other stuff that is a bill every month. It could be utilities. It could be, our going out to eat. It's the cell phone bill, the groceries, just everything that we buy that next month we're going to have to buy again. It's the money that never goes away. So it's just kind of part of our lifestyle. And then if we're good stewards of our money, we should be putting something aside. So we've got $1,400 going to either savings, maybe it's going to a 401k, wherever it's going, it's just being put aside for our nest egg, so to speak. And so in this particular example is what we call a paycheck to paycheck situation. $5,000 came into your life and $5,000 went back out in the same month. So in this example, it brings us to what I magically called cash flow. If you don't have cash flow in your life, then it really pinches and hinders our progress on being able to do things in the future. So we'll make more sense of cash flow for those who aren't familiar with that term coming up, and it'll totally make sense. Right now, in order to get ahead, we have to generate some form of cash flow in our life, which is going to expedite and speed up what's going to happen mathematically. So in this example, we just, like I say, spent it all in, got nothing out. Now, you know what? I probably should move my screen here so you guys can see that. We'll hide me down here in the corner for a second. So first of all, I need to make kind of a clarification on the types of debt that exist, because not all debt is created equal, and that's what really makes this work. So if we're looking at a loan, like an auto loan, a student loan, a house loan, or in this example, those two, the house and the car, those are amortized debts, which means we make a payment in, and then that payment leaves and goes to the bank, and we never see that money again. Our principal is reduced, the interest on that debt was paid, and the money's gone, okay? But if we come over and we look at oh gosh, I got to keep my keyboard in play. If we look at lines of credit, those are what we call, recurring debt or reusable debt. So they use a simple interest pattern where if we make a payment to that credit card, our available line of credit opens up, and then we can then re-spend or reuse that debt again without having to reapply. Okay, so we all kind of understand how that works, but we need to understand that they are two different types of debt and they behave in a very, very different manner. So the way I like to describe that for people to understand what I mean is if we look at this particular slide and we've got 32 degrees, if I just throw that at you and say that's the freezing point of water, fresh water at sea level, that is a correct, accurate statement 100%. But what if I add a Celsius figure on the end? Is that now true? No, it's not. Because Fahrenheit and Celsius, although they both talk about temperature, they're very different scales. So 32 degrees Fahrenheit is the freezing point of fresh water, and 0 degrees Celsius is also that. And it comes that way when we look at our debts. We don't know that when we're being told, hey, I'm paying X amount in interest, that the scale of the interest might be built differently depending on whether it's a loan or a line of credit. Is it simple interest or amortized debt? So if I change it just 1 degree over here on the Celsius scale, even though the number is smaller, this temperature in this particular situation is actually warmer than 32. So I need us to understand that gap, right? So 0 degrees Celsius and 32 degrees Fahrenheit are equal, even though one has a much larger number. And yet we can change that scale and make it different with the numbers not making sense if we don't have the scale in place. So scales matter. The reason why I'm saying this is when we look at 21% interest on a debt, on a credit card versus 6% on an amortized loan, the math actually equates very different. The 6% on a loan is actually higher interest than 21% on a credit card. And I'm going to prove it to you, so just hold with me for those of you who are skeptical. So I brought this into play. I wanted to just kind of show how an amortized debt plays out. And I apologize, my little face here is going to keep getting in the way of where we want to be. So the amortized interest, when we buy a house, we all understand that the first payment that we make is much heavier in interest than it is in principal. And in this particular example's case, that's how it is. So $250 of the payment, that $1,200 spent, only $250 affected our debt's principal payment. But $950 went towards interest. Okay? Now, if we keep getting my face in the way, and we flip to the other end, when we get to the end of that 30-year mortgage, it's the exact opposite. $950 went to principal, and only $250 went to interest. And so when we see that, our brain automatically assumes this is a fair trade, right? Starts off front heavy, works its way in about the middle, it passes, and then it flips over to being more principal than after. But when we buy a home, how often do we actually live in it for 30 years before we pay it off? We don't. When you go online, the average time people spend in their homes is somewhere between 5 to 7 years. And so when we look at the scale in that realm, we're actually constantly on the wrong side of the swing. We're paying, the majority of our money is going to interest to the bank. Very little is paying down our principal, and essentially we become renters to the bank. So we want to understand, how can I beat that system, whether it be any other loan? I know we're using a house right now, but it could be a student loan. It could be, just any kind of normal loan that you would pick up from the bank tends to be an amortized situation. Okay, so I got to put this in a little bit more perspective, and we've already kind of hit on it, but I wanted to show you some math, right? So when we're trying to generate cash flow and we're looking at whether a loan or a line is important to us, let's look at the math. So if we come over here and we paid $12,000 in principal to our loan, during that same amount of time, we would spend $45,000 in interest. So we want to figure out, how do I beat that situation? So, and then we come over here and there's no cash flow, right? When we compare the two, our money goes out, it's gone. We already mentioned that. When we get our line, it revolves, we get to use it again, and we have that different scale for our interest rate. but our principal is also much more liquid. We can attack it. If we have equity in our house, how hard is it to use it to do something? It's very difficult. We have to go apply. We've got to get through, credit processes and all these different things and prove that we're worthy of pulling out another loan for the equity in our house. Whereas a line of credit has that simple revolving, get to use it every month as much as we use it properly. So the principle there is much more liquid. So if we go back to our example, if I make 48 payments on that house at $1,200 a month, I spend $12,000 towards my principal, and $45,000 went to interest, and that's it. That's just money gone. Okay. So here's rule number one. If we're paying down our debts, lines are better than loans. Okay. So if we have to have a debt, we would prefer it to be a line or a credit line as opposed to a loan. And hopefully you're kind of getting the picture of why. Rule number two is we have to change our mindset a little bit about the way we utilize our money. So with an employee mindset, I would call it, or a day-to-day, just nobody really taught us about money mindset, if that makes sense. We're taught that our cash is our currency. Cash is our money that buys things. But the wealthy mindset, which I shifted to several years ago and really started to see a change in the way my money lasted, is I realized that cash simply equals velocity. The amount of cash I had sped up things, but I used leverage. I leveraged my money and my abilities to understand the math as my currency. And that'll make, again, more sense as we get going here, but I'm just trying to set the groundwork to make sense of what's about to happen. It's really cool. All right, so we got to get back to our example. So first things first, in order for us to start paying debt off early, I have to generate cash flow. It's critical, it's important, and you need to just grasp that concept. So our $5,000 goes into our checking account, and the first thing we're going to do is, instead of paying our mortgage immediately with it, we're going to deposit that money over to our line of credit. Okay? Now, if I put my money on a line of credit, to pay it to a credit card as an example, but I prefer to say line of credit because there's lots of different options. Checking lines of credit, home equity lines of credit. There's a lot of ways to utilize this. But if I deposit my funds over there, my principal balance reduces, but it just comes with a card. I can swipe it to buy gas, groceries, pay some utility bills, whatever. Like, I can still spend the money just the same way. I just parked it in a new location. Okay, so follow me here. So when I did that one move, depositing my money, immediately covered the minimum monthly payment on that debt. So the $600 that they asked for, I said I'm going to make a deposit, but essentially they counted that as a $5,000 payment. So I wiped out the need for that $600 a month right there. What did that do for me? It gave me $600 in cash flow. Cash that I didn't have, or now that I get to keep because I can still work with it. It's pretty cool. So if that didn't blow your mind at first, let's watch what happens next. It gets pretty fun. Okay, the next thing I'm going to have to ask you to do, which is difficult for a lot of people because we've been trained for many, many years that we need to save our money in a 401k. We need to save our money in a retirement account. But I need you to open up your mind just a little bit and think how many people today are going to be able to retire on just what's in their 401k and have enough. I'm finding it's very, very rare. The few people that I do know in my life that have done that tend to be much, much older. And obviously they will have had to have retired, so then that makes sense. But also keeping in mind that we need that money to benefit us now so that our future can be much brighter. So I'm not asking you to stop saving. I'm asking you to park the money in a new location. And that location is ultimately going to be on your line. And here's why. When I park the money on a line of credit, it reduces the principal balance, which means the bank is going to charge me less interest on what's there. But the money's still liquid. If I need it for an emergency, if I have that situation where it needs to be pulled from, it's there and I can still tap into it instantly. Okay? So when we combine the two, again, I tried to make simple math tonight. We have generated $5,000 in cash flow in this example, and we've not done anything to change our bills. We simply used our money differently. So by changing a little bit of behavioral status, I usually call my line of credit my velocity account or my new checking account. I just treat it differently. It's not a credit card to me. It's a line of credit. It's a new checking account. And I'm going to spend wisely from there. Okay, now this whole goal isn't to go, woohoo, I got a $2,000 raise and now I'm going to go waste my money. No, you're going to be smart. We're going to behave differently and we're going to do something. So in order to see this, I built this graph so that you could watch. This was our $15,000 line of credit that we were given, but we started off with a $12,000 balance right here. Now, when I deposited that $5,000, I immediately dropped the principal that I'm being charged. And now the bank's going to only charge me interest on that lower amount. We follow? But I still have to pay my bills, right? So we go out and we start paying our bills. And once all our expenses are paid, we've brought our balance back up, but we've not achieved anywhere near where we were before because we've only spent $3,000 instead of $5,000. Because remember before in our example, our money all came in and it all went out. But this way we went in and we still had $2,000 left because we took the $600 that we used to pay for this credit card that we're staring at and the other $1,400 that we were saving in a very low yield savings account. And we used it to drop the amount of interest we were being charged. Very cool? Now, if we do that for a couple of months, what ends up happening is we start reducing what's on this balance, and we've not asked for any raise from our boss. But what happens if we get out here around month 4 and we have an emergency? I mean, the other day, my wife was driving around and she blew a tire. Not a big deal. We had them go take in the tire and we were going to have that repaired. Well, I get there and they're like, sorry, it's in a spot we can't repair it. So we're going to have to change it. Oh, and by the way, the other tire over here doesn't look, by the time it's all said and done, I'm buying all new tires. Not an expense I had planned on. But because I had built myself a velocity situation, that extra expense could come right out of this very same account and it didn't affect my day. I had it available. But then I just keep moving on and paying, $5,000 in, $3,000 out, $5,000, and eventually, if the math plays out, depending on how much that emergency was, in about 6 months, I will have paid off that line of credit, having done nothing but just use my money differently. Okay. Now, what's cool? We've just paid off a credit card, right? Bravo, right? So let's take this to a different situation. If you were to pay off your credit card really quickly, do you think the bank might want to increase your line of credit? Absolutely. Now, I'm not guaranteeing that's going to happen. There is no saying that. But again, I just wanted to move the math along and show what happens if they did. Because how does the bank make money on credit cards? It's by you carrying a balance. And if they quickly realize you're the type of person that will not carry a balance with them, then they need you to get more debt in there so that they can get more interest before you pay it off again. So banks are smart, right? They're about making money. That's their business. So if we get that $10,000 increase, we can now chunk debts away at a much faster pace. So the way this is going to happen, we're going to attack our mortgage. So we're going to come over here to our home loan. And let's say we take $12,000 in principal and we move it over to our line of credit. Now you notice I have our checking account in the middle here. Do you think I can just use a credit card to swipe and pay my house loan? Heck no. I mean, very, very rarely are there circumstances, and I will say openly, I've done it, but it takes a little bit of a process. So my point is let's transfer the money from our line of credit into our checking account, use that to make a direct check payment to our loan, just as an example. I'm not saying you have to do it that way. And then now we've essentially transferred $12,000 from our home loan back over to our line of credit. We now have debt again that needs to be paid. So we come back over here, and now we go through the same process. Over the course of 6 months, we go through using our normal day-to-day life. And again, am I asking for like a get-rich-quick scheme or anything of that nature? Absolutely not. But I'm showing you how to attack your debt using your exact income without any change. So I say without a change, you have to do some things. But here's the cool part. Let's look at the math. That seems like magic. I always love this part, okay? So if I come in here and I figure out what my simple interest is, the calculation for doing that is you take the $12,000 balance and you times that by the interest rate, 21%. And in this case, we only had that debt for 6 months, so we divide that by 2. And so that debt would have cost us roughly $1,260. But if we go to our amortization schedule and we remove that $12,000 in principal, remember we talked about this before, we wipe out $45,000 in interest that we would have had to pay on the house, which fast forwarded the loan 4 years. Is that cool? It's amazing. And again, we're just understanding, we're not just making the bare minimum payments, but we're behaving in an intelligent fashion to move our debts along in a way that gets us ahead. So if we are doing that same process we talked about before, we take a $12,000 chunk from our home loan, we spend 6 months to pay it off. Take another chunk from $12,000, take another 6 months to pay it off. So what starts to happen is we just repeat until the house loan is paid off, okay? And so let me go one back here. So after about 4 years, let's say it takes you 5, maybe it takes you 7, but you can actually pay off a 30-year mortgage in about 7 years by simply taking this principle into play. So now we've paid off the house, okay? No more house. So what did that do? We don't have a house payment to pay anymore. So $1,200 gets to come add into our cash flow. And remember what I said earlier, the more cash you have, the more you increase the velocity or the speed at which you can pay things off, right? So now we've got $3,200 that we are in keeping in cash flow. Our expenses down here drop to only $1,800 a month. We got our $1,200 in life expenses, and then we got $600 on our car. So now let's go over here and take it another step, and we chunk away our car, right? That same $12,000 balance we can now pay off in 4 months. It's pretty cool, okay? So now we've paid off the car in 4 months instead of 5 years. Now, obviously, time's been going by. We've been chunking away at the house, and then, so time's gone by. But once we immediately take effect to play at that car loan debt, or in the case of my wife and I, man, we attacked our student loan debt. I was excited to be rid of that. In fact, I remember celebrating a little bit when that happened. But my point is now we've taken the $600 a month car payment, and it's gone away. So now we have $3,800 in cash flow and only $1,200 in living expenses that'll never go away. So what did we just do? We wiped out all of our debt in a very short amount of time, okay? So now we come in, and that because of that increased cash flow, if we were to pay $12,000 to something, I just kept the same math in play, but now we're just paying it off in a couple of months. How would you like to be able to pay off $12,000 in debt easily in 3 months? Simply because you deposited your money in a different way and spent it utilizing the strategy, okay? So in this situation, we've now paid off all our debt. Now, normally right here is where I plug in and go to the next level, but I want you guys to understand who are watching. This is where I'm gonna leave the video. But I would like to let you know that from an investor standpoint, I can now take this cash flow coming in and change my strategy to structure myself to be able to buy more properties, to be able to get rentals out there, let cash be generated from those rentals that adds to my cash flow every month. And what happens when the day hits that I have enough cash flow from other assets that I own that they equate to more money than what I actually, spend in a month? Let's say I want to live on $10,000 a month. If I can generate $10,000 in cash flow, now I can live anywhere in the world, do anything I want, and note that my money will follow me wherever I go, and the next month it will be replenished. So how scared am I of running out of money in retirement when I hit that level? I'm not. If I want to live a nicer lifestyle than that, then I just go get more assets. So my point is on a future video, moving forward from this, I would be happy to share with you how to generate cash flowing assets, as an example, using this strategy to then pay off more debts. But I just want to say thanks for watching. I wanted to keep this brief. Take this for what it's worth. And if you got questions, comments, whatever, put them below in the group. Let's let everybody know what you're thinking. And thanks for watching, guys. Thanks.